Hello, welcome to the STG Azure Certification Tip of the Week video series. This is the first video that we're going to make, and today we're going to talk a little bit about app services. So you'll notice in the Azure Certification, the first section here is on app services. We have app services, Azure SQL, Azure Storage, and so on. And the first section is on app services. App services are really kind of the first entry point into Azure that you should know about. It's a way for you to host your web APIs and your websites, and it's really a good entry point into getting into Azure. So that's why the first section of the certification is on app services. So you notice the very first requirement in the entire certification is to create a new app service using the Azure portal. And so we're going to do one of those really quick. So if you haven't already set up your Azure account, look at the write-up that I did last week, and that should give you what you need to get your Azure account set up and started. So let's go ahead and go into my Azure account, and this is what the Azure portal looks like today. There's no guarantee that that's what it's going to look like tomorrow, because they seem to like to change it a lot. And there's different ways to create resources in Azure. App service is one type of resource. Here at the home screen, there's a create a resource button. We can click on that, and that will take us into the new resource screen. We could also click on the create a resource up here. Takes us to the same screen. We can click on all services, and it will let us pick a resource to create. So there's many ways. There's actually more than that to create app services and resources in Azure. We're just going to click on the create a resource here on the home page. That takes us to the resource selection screen. Now over here on the right side is the popular resources. These are the ones that most people make, and they're the most popular. So web app is actually one of these. So we're going to click on web app. Now it's weird because you have to actually click on the word web app rather than the icon or any of that. If you click on the icon, it doesn't do anything. You click on the web app, and that'll take you into the screen to create a web app. Web apps are really easy to create. So I'm going to create one called STG Azure Cert 1. We're going to put it in that subscription. So the subscription, you probably only have one, but if you have multiple subscriptions, you can select that here. And then you select a resource group. So I'm going to create a new resource group because I don't have any in here, and I'm going to call this STG Azure Certification. So resource groups are an easy way for you to keep track of and organize all of your resources in Azure. Typically, as you're putting things into Azure, you're going to have maybe different applications, maybe different projects, different programs that you're going to be running in Azure. And you want to be able to split those up and organize them a little bit rather than just having everything all in one great big pool. And so by creating resource groups and sticking things into resource groups, it's going to make things a lot easier for us to organize. The next thing we need to do is we need to select whether we want Windows or Linux. Now if you're doing .NET Core application, it doesn't really matter. You can do Windows or Linux. If you're doing a .NET Framework application, you'll need to host it in a Windows app service. And then we can pick whether we want to do code or whether we want to do a Docker image. Now for the Azure certification, we are not doing any Docker yet, and so we're going to go ahead and pick code to do that. So the last thing that we need to do is we need to set the service plan. And the service plan does a couple of things. It lets you define where you're hosting your application as far as data center is concerned, and what kind of resources your resources are going to use as far as hardware. Okay, so if we click on this, you'll notice that it's already going to create one for us, and this is just going to be a default plan, and it's going to be set to an S1 set of hardware. That may or may not be what you want. For now, what we want to do is we want to create it in a free tier. So instead of selecting the one that they want to create for us, we're going to do a create new, and then we're going to give it a name, and we're going to call this STG Azure Certification. We'll go ahead and put it in the central US, that's fine, but we're going to change the pricing tier. See where it says S1 standard? We're going to actually change the pricing tier. And you can see here that the S1 gives you 100 total ACU, which is a Azure compute unit. It's a way that they bundle things like memory and disk I/O and CPU and all kinds of stuff into a unit that they then make available. And so the more ACUs you have, the more performant your application is going to be. And in this S1, we get 1.75 gigabytes of memory. We get an A-series compute, which is just the type of hardware that it's running on. And it's going to cost us about $44.64 a month, which is not what we want for this certification. So we also have this option to do dev test workloads. So we're going to pick that one. And you can see that we have a free tier. Now the free tier is missing a lot of the things that the S1 tier provides. So if you look at the S1 tier, these right here are all of the different things that we have available to us with an S1 tier and with all of the higher tiers. So we can create custom domains, we can set up an auto scale, we can have slots, we can have daily backups, and we can use Traffic Manager. So for this very first part of the certification, we're not going to use any of those. Eventually, on some of the later steps, we will be using some of that, and so we'll need to scale our app service up and then back down. But for now, let's just go ahead and create a free tier app service. So we're going to select that, we're going to hit apply, and then you can see over here now in our new app service plan, we have our name, our location, and our pricing tier is F1 free. If we click on OK, then you'll notice that we have our app service plan now as STG Azure Certification. And then we can set up application insights. So for right now, I'm going to turn off application insights again because we don't want to pay for anything for this first run. So I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to hit apply, and now you can see application insights is disabled. Now eventually we're going to want to turn application insights on. It gives you a lot of really great debugging information and performance information for your site. But for this particular application, we're turning off. So then once we have all that stuff filled out, all we need to do is hit create. And you can see when we have the little line going across up here, that means that it's working on deploying those resources. So they aren't available to us yet. And so we just need to wait, and it could be a few minutes before that's ready. So once it's done, then it'll pop up this dialog and we can just click on the go to resource. And this is now the Azure App Service that we created. So you'll see that we have all the information about it. Here's our URL, stgazure1.azurewebsites.net. So all of our app services are going to have the domain .azurewebsites.net. And then this, the host here is going to be whatever we named our Azure App Service. So we can even click on this URL and you can see that it'll open up that website. Now obviously we don't have anything in there right now, and so it's just going to show this placeholder page. But if we go back to here, and we can go down and we can see a lot of the things that we're able to do with this app service. And these are things that are going to be touched on later in the certification. This is where we're going to go if we want to add deployment slots. Now you'll notice that, like I said earlier, right now we cannot add deployment slots because we're in a free tier. So we need to upgrade to the S1 before we add deployment slots. But the nice thing is that once you have your app service built, you can scale it up to an S1, do what you need to do for the certification, and that may take an hour, it may take 10 minutes, who knows. But as soon as you're done, all you need to do is scale it right back down again to the free service, and then you won't have to pay that whole $44. The $44 is prorated out for how much time that app service is actually at that level. So if we come down here, you'll see we have the configuration area, and this is where you can set up app settings, connection strings, and things that your application is going to need. You can go into general settings, and this lets you set your .NET Framework version if you're using that. It lets you pick your stack, whether you're using .NET, PHP, Python, or Java. And there's a lot of other things here. So this always on option, if you're going to have a website or a web API that's heavily used, you're going to want to have that always on turned on. What happens is that when this is turned off, then after a certain amount of time, your website will go to sleep. And so the next time you come to use it, it's going to take a little while to warm up and get ready to be used. And so if you don't want that lag when you first come up, you're going to want to make sure you turn this on. And again, we don't have that capability in the free tier. only in the higher tiers. We also have a lot of other stuff that we'll touch on through this certification and through other certifications. But these two here are where you're going to go scale up your app service plan. So if we click on that, you'll notice that we're set at F1. When we get to the point where we need to start using some of the higher levels, this is where we're going to go set that. So we'll just go into production, we'll pick the level that we want, and then we'll hit apply, and that will scale up our website to that level. Now, it's super important to remember to scale those back down again when you don't need those resources. It's really easy to forget to scale it back down, and then you'll get charged the full amount for that month. Be careful as you're scaling up that you make sure you scale back down again when you're done. And then the scale out is where you can set it up to load balance between multiple instances. And that's something else that we touch on later, but you need the S1 or higher option for that. So there's a lot of other things in here. We won't go over all of them. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to contact me, and we'll get you hooked up on that. So that's just kind of a quick overview on how to create an app service in the portal. So we kind of touched on this first piece, creating an app service. We kind of touched on scaling up. We kind of touched on the environment variables. That was that app settings thing. And then on scaling. And so that should give you a really good start on this first section of the certification. So good luck, and next week we'll put out another video and we'll talk about some of these other items in the first level of the certification.